So from the activity from yesterday, what you were supposed to do is take a look at these pictures of organisms. And again, all of these things fit the characteristics of Mr. L. Grummel. And you were to take and look at them, make some observations, and start thinking about how you would organize them into different groups. And that's what scientists do. Once something is confirmed as living, they'll put it into a kingdom. Now, you might have done this a little bit differently. I started out with ones that kind of looked a little funky and kind of like a simple and kind of boogery looking. I put in one group. I put what I thought were plants in a different group, one that had leaves and maybe flowers and stems. I put ones that I thought maybe were animals, had maybe a head and eyes in one group. I knew that group 4, those were probably mushrooms. They had kind of a mushroom type shape. And then for me, group 5 and 6 were kind of weird ones. I put group 6 together because they kind of had more of that cylinder shape. And then there wasn't really any other organisms to me that looked like group number 5. Now you again may have done this completely different. Maybe you did it on color, or maybe you did it solely on shape. But this is how I decided to kind of group them together. Now, most kids kind of try to do what I did, right? They group them by what they look like, which does work sometimes. But for example, the one that I have underneath the frog, that's a picture of coral. The frog and coral are both animals, but they look super, super different. That coral almost looks more like a fungus than it does an animal. So we really can't just go by what something looks like in order to put it in a kingdom. We use more characteristics besides just how something looks. So how do scientists actually organize all living things? They organize them again into groups or kingdoms, and these are the names of the 6 different kingdoms. We've got Archaea kingdom, Bacteria kingdom, Protist kingdom, the Fungus or Fungi kingdom, Plant kingdom, and Animal kingdom. And they use these 4 questions or 4 characteristics as to which kingdom something belongs to. So they ask themselves, how many cells is it made of? Meaning, is it unicellular or is it multicellular? Does it have a nucleus in its cell? How they get their energy and how they reproduce. So those characteristics allow scientists to place certain organisms in certain kingdoms. Now, just like we've been working on the last couple of days, these vocabulary terms are super, super important that you know, because these are the answers to those questions. Meaning, if it's a eukaryote, that means it has a cell with a nucleus. If it's a prokaryote, it does not have a nucleus in every cell. Multicellular means, again, it's made of many cells. Unicellular means it's only made of one cell. A heterotroph means it cannot make its own food. It has to eat, consume, or find food from somewhere else to get energy. And an autotroph, again, means that it uses the sunlight to create food for itself. So we have to know those terms in order to really understand how scientists place organisms in different kingdoms. The first kingdom that we're going to start with in learning about is called the Archaea kingdom. So with the Archaea kingdom, all organisms that are placed in this kingdom are unicellular. Again, what that means is they're just made of one cell. That one cell does not have a nucleus, which makes them prokaryotes. Most of the time, they get their energy from consuming or eating or taking in food from somewhere in their surroundings. And they reproduce asexually by simply just making a copy of itself and then dividing into 2. These guys are kind of cool in that they live in extreme environments on Earth. So a lot of scientists think that these were one of the first living things that ever were around on our planet. So some of these guys, like the extreme halophiles, they live in salty conditions where like nothing else can survive because the salt content is so intense. Or thermophiles, they live in like deep sea vents or places where there is such extreme temperatures that nothing else could survive. Or the acidophiles, they live in places where the acid content where they live is so intense and so extreme that nothing else can survive. So these guys are very simple and they live in really crazy places on Earth that nothing else can really survive. Moving on to bacteria. Now, bacteria have some similar characteristics that archaea have, but these guys are found in normal places on Earth. So again, these guys are unicellular, made of one cell. They are prokaryotes, which means that one cell does not have a nucleus. They are heterotrophs, which means they have to eat or consume or find food. And they reproduce asexually, again, by simply just making copies of itself. So unlike the archaea, you're going to find these guys in pretty normal types of places on Earth. So they're in soil, they're living in your kitchen, they're on the desks at school, they're in the bathroom. And these are the types that live actually in and on your body as well. Again, some of them are good, they can help you digest food, and then some of them might not be super good for you. But again, those are the characteristics of the bacteria kingdom. Next is the protist kingdom. These guys are mostly unicellular, meaning they're most of the time you're going to find ones in this kingdom that are one-celled, but there are a couple of them that are multicellular. They are all going to be eukaryotes, meaning if they're one cell or many cells, they all have a nucleus inside of their cells or cell. They can be autotrophs, meaning they can get their energy from the sun, or they can be heterotrophs, meaning they can eat, or there's some that are so cool where they're actually both, meaning like if there's no sunlight, they might be eaten. Or if all of a sudden there's nothing around to eat, they might be able to use the sun to get energy. So they kind of have the best of both worlds in that sense. And they're able to reproduce both asexually and sexually. This kingdom is kind of weird, and sometimes we call this the junk drawer kingdom. So if something isn't quite fitting in the fungus kingdom, and it's not quite fitting in a plant kingdom, and it doesn't quite fit with the animal kingdom, but it's a eukaryote, a lot of times we just throw it in this kingdom. So for example, slime mold, algae, and amoebas, they all have kind of plant, fungus, and animal characteristics, but they don't fit perfectly in those kingdoms. So we'll put it in the protist kingdom. And the way that I kind of think about it is, again, a junk drawer at home. Like I've got a junk drawer in my kitchen that's just full of a bunch of random stuff, right? So if you've got items that don't fit in this cabinet in your kitchen, and they're not dishes, and they're not mixing bowls, and they're not silverware, you kind of put all your miscellaneous items into one drawer or one cabinet. That's kind of like this kingdom, as long as it is still a eukaryote. Moving on to the fungus kingdom. So a fungus is multicellular except yeast. For some reason, yeast is unicellular, and they've placed it in this kingdom, and I'm not 100% sure why, but all of them are multicellular except yeast. They are eukaryotes, meaning every single cell has a nucleus. They are heterotrophs, meaning they cannot make their own food, but how they get their food is by absorbing the nutrients around them. So they don't eat, they don't have a mouth, but they absorb their nutrients. And these guys mostly use asexual reproduction with spores. Plant kingdom. The plant kingdom has these characteristics. All plants are multicellular, meaning they're made of many cells. They are all eukaryotes, meaning they have a nucleus in every single one of those cells. And these guys are autotrophs, meaning they are able to self-feed. They're able to take the energy from the sun and convert it into food and energy for themselves. They usually reproduce sexually, but there are some that reproduce asexually. Now, I always get kids that say, well, what about the Venus flytrap, the ones that technically eat insects, yet they're still considered plants? Well, here's the deal with those. The Venus flytrap, yes, it does trap insects, but it cannot survive on insects alone. It has to get energy from the sun still in order to survive. When a Venus flytrap gets a fly, it's just extra nutrients that it gets for the plant. So it can still survive without eating flies. That's why it's still considered to be a plant. And then last but not least, the animal kingdom. This is obviously the one that most of us are most familiar with. So all animals are multicellular or made of many cells. They are eukaryotes, which means they have a nucleus in every single one of those cells. They are heterotrophs, meaning they have to eat or consume or find food for energy. And most of the time they use sexual reproduction, but there are some that are actually able to asexually reproduce. And you'll learn more about those different types of asexual reproduction when we get to our cells unit later in the year. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through what you're going to be doing in step 2. So for step 2, you're going to open up 2 different things. So you're going to need 2 tabs. The first tab is going to be this Google slideshow presentation. The second thing you're going to open up is the Google Doc. And in that Google Doc, there's a table. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to highlight the characteristics that each kingdom has. Now, you might know some of them just from listening to me, but if you don't, that's why I want you to have this slideshow open so that you can reference it. So what you're going to do is, for example, for Archaea, you're going to take the little highlighting tool, which is right here, and you're going to highlight the characteristics of the Archaea kingdom. So Archaea, for example, are unicellular. So I'm going to highlight this color. They are prokaryotes. So again, I'm going to highlight the prokaryotes. They're mostly heterotroph, so I would highlight that. And they are asexual, so I would highlight that. That's all you have to do for the Archaea. I do have some examples listed on the right of those certain kinds of organisms, but you don't have to do anything with that. So again, once I'm done with one, then I'm going to go on to the next. I'm going to go on to bacteria, and I'm going to highlight what each of those characteristics are for that kingdom. So after you've done the entire thing, you should have a beautiful little chart that gives you information about the characteristics of each and every kingdom. Now, this might take you a little bit of time, which is totally fine. So if you don't finish it in class today, you'll also have some time on Monday to finish. If you do get finished with this, meaning if you get done, you've listened to this and you get done with step 2, I would love it if you did step 3 and step 4. Step 3 is just showing you an overview clip of what the 6 kingdoms are, and then step 4 is the enrichment, and I've found a couple different kingdom video clips for you to watch. Again, if you don't get to that today, that's okay. You'll be able to do those things on Monday when we have asynchronous learning day. If you do have any questions, please, send me an email, shoot me a little comment. I might not be able to answer it right away, but I should be able to get back to you at some point this coming weekend.